Imagine living a life so filled with pain and injustice that even death couldn't bring you peace. This is the story of Sara Baartman, a woman born in the 18th century whose life was marked by unimaginable suffering. Her story is one of exploitation, cruelty, and resilience, and it will leave you questioning humanity itself. What was her crime? Simply being born with features that others deemed unusual. What happened to her even after her death is both shocking and heartbreaking. Sara Baartman was born in 1789 in the Gamtoos River Valley of South Africa. She belonged to the Khoikhoi people, one of the earliest indigenous tribes of the region. Her life began with tragedy. She lost her mother when she was only 2 years old. Her father, a cattle herder, was killed during the violent colonial conflicts between the British and the Dutch. By the time she was just a teenager, Sara had already experienced loss that most people could never imagine. At the age of 14, she married a drummer from her tribe, and though their marriage brought moments of happiness, it was short-lived. Their children died shortly after birth, and her husband was tragically killed by Dutch colonists when Sara was only 16. Alone, grieving, and vulnerable, she was taken by a black merchant named Willem Caesar, who forced her to work as a slave on a farm in Cape Town. As if her life hadn't already been filled with enough suffering, Sara's story took a darker turn. While working on the farm, a visiting doctor named William Dunlop noticed her. He was fascinated by her physical features, particularly her wide hips and what he described as unusual genitalia. At the time, European clothing concealed most women's bodies, so how Dunlop even noticed these features remains a mystery. But his interest wasn't medical, it was exploitative. Dunlop saw an opportunity to profit off Sara. He promised her riches, fame, and a better life if she accompanied him to London. Being illiterate and desperate for hope, Sara agreed, signing a contract she couldn't even read. She thought this was her chance to escape her harsh reality, but what awaited her was a nightmare. Sara arrived in London at just 21 years old, full of naive hope. But instead of the medical research and fame she was promised, she was paraded around like a spectacle. She was forced to wear tight, revealing clothing and dance in front of crowds, while enduring constant harassment and ridicule. Europeans nicknamed her the Hottentot Venus, a cruel title that objectified her body and turned her into a public curiosity. Her physical features, now thought to be a result of a condition called steatopygia, common among her tribe, were the source of both fascination and mockery. For 4 years, she was exhibited in circuses and private shows, subjected to unimaginable humiliation. As the abuse continued, Sara turned to alcohol, perhaps as a way to dull the pain of her existence. But her suffering didn't end there. In 1814, Sara was sold to a new owner in Paris, where her exploitation became even more grotesque. She was displayed alongside wild animals, treated as less than human, and endured further degradation. A year later, at the age of just 26, Sara passed away, likely from illness brought on by the harsh conditions she endured. But even in death, she was not granted peace. Less than a day after her death, her body was dissected by Napoleon's surgeon, Georges Cuvier. He removed her brain and genitals for scientific research and had her body stuffed and put on display in a Paris museum. For over a century, her remains were exhibited, objectified even in death. Decades passed, and Sara's story was largely forgotten until her people began to fight for her legacy. In the 1950s, the Khoikhoi tribe demanded the return of her remains from France. but the French government refused, claiming that everything in their museums belonged to France. It wasn't until Nelson Mandela became president in 1994 that the fight for Sarah's return gained momentum. Mandela personally appealed to the French president, but even then the process dragged on for years. Finally, in 2002, after tireless efforts by activists and the power of a single poem written by South African poet Diana Ferris, France agreed to return Sarah's remains. The poem, which spoke of Sarah's suffering and humanity, moved the French Senate to action. On August 9, 2002, Women's Day in South Africa, Sara Baartman was laid to rest in her homeland, her story finally coming to an end. Sara Baartman's story is a haunting reminder of the cruelty humans are capable of, but also of the resilience and strength of those who fight for justice. Her life was stolen, her body exploited, and her legacy tarnished. Yet, in the end, she became a symbol of resistance and hope for her people. Thank you for watching this deeply emotional journey. If this story moved you, please consider subscribing for more untold stories of resilience and survival. Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, stay compassionate and curious.